Hi, welcome to what we might call tea bowl talk. I thought it might be interesting to look at a number of tea bowls. Some of them will be Black Raku, which my students are currently attempting, and some of them will be um, wood-fired, Oribe or two, some miscellaneous kind of special techniques. And we'll just look at the tea bowls and see what emerges in showing them to you. And this might be kind of a helpful exercise. So to start with, I thought I'd start with this is a box here. It's a box that a lot of tea bowls come in specially made boxes, and you can get them made in Japan, which I have done before, but I had the good fortune of a dear friendship with a really great wood craftsman, a really great wood artist, and he makes displays and things. He has a company that does that, so he made me these boxes. And actually, I should show you a different one that's, this is kind of a prototype, but this is the way they come. They come wrapped in this ribbon material here. You unwrap the ribbon, lift the top, and so we have some bubble wrap, which wouldn't really be in a bowl that you're collecting. And then here's a tea bowl. And this is this is a distorted Y style, or what I might call a funnel shape or Y shape. You can get a sense for the wood fire effect. Here's the interior. And right in the center, I usually have a little bit of a dip there, a chadumari. And that's a place where the tea can reform, kind of slide down the sides after you're done drinking, so you can admire the color. And as we go around, you can see the effects on this bowl of a combination of things. There's a little bit of there's just a little bit of lovely kind of separation going on here of the Shino glaze that's fired. This is a technique that I call Oni Shino, which is the idea of the Shino tradition is to have the glaze completely protected from wood ash. The wood ash never touches it. Every Shino bowl is fired in a sagger, completely protected from the ash, and it's a very long, slow firing. But what I like to do is called Unishino, or demon Shino, which means basically it's left to the ravages of the wood fire. So what I do is I place this bowl in jeopardy, basically put it out where the Shino gets affected by the ash. And so maybe we'll put that over here to start with. And so let's look at a few Black Raku tea bowls. Got quite a few here that we can look at. And I'll show you something that I particularly like about Black Raku tea bowls is you get, if you're lucky, if the firing goes well, I don't know if it's less luck and more practice, but you can see here that there's a transition from glossy to matte. The texture is actually changing pretty dramatically in this bowl as we go around. And so, and here you get a little bit of both before going right into a full glossy kind of surface. So this change and variation is highly prized. I think for its natural quality. In nature, often you might see moss on one side of a tree or lichen growing on a rock. And so there's a change in texture. You can see the inside here is mostly matte. There is it's hard to see with the dark glaze, little glossy drips down there, but here is a Udamari. And you can also see, which is called the Chazenzuni, which is the curved bottom that moves upward, that is just slightly curved before it hits the side, which turns at a kind of 90-degree angle. And that idea is, that shape is important too. The chadumari is the place where after you're drinking tea and you have 3 sips, there's always some film of tea left on the side of the bowl, and when you hold it up again, the tea will pour down and fill that little dimple that you've left in the middle. And that allows you during tea ceremony to admire the color of the tea, and especially in contrast with the bowl and that sort of thing. That's one aspect. And then the reason that the Chasen Zuni is that this part of the bottom here from that goes from the little dimple that is the Chadumari, which actually means a pool of tea, up to the side of the wall. The reason that is just slightly curved is it matches the shape of the chazen, the bamboo tea whisk that mixes the green powdered tea. So that gives you a little sense of all these aspects of the tea bowl. And then it's a fairly vertical cylinder, but you can see that as I go through watching the silhouette, you can see how it changes and alters. And that's done in a number of ways. One thing that I like to do is I like to have a sense of pushing outward and squeezing in. And, there's kind of a rhythm of this going. Let's see if we can get a good kind of matte profile here that you can see. It's coming out, it's going inward, and it's kind of constrained here, then going outward again, and then maybe an inward at the final. So it's a kind of a rhythm or a dance of inward and outward. And that it's a volume, it's a sense of, I think of it almost like a lung or a balloon, something that feels inflated and full, volume rich. And part of that impression is created by compressing the top a little bit so that it's narrower than the full body of the bowl. And these bowls, you can see, are quite large for tea, but you're only filling about a quarter of a cup of liquid. The size of it is because the whisking is quite vigorous, and in order to get a good mix, you really need to be able to move the tea around. So you need a larger space to do that, and it's a lovely shape to hold. So here, this is one black Raku tea bowl. Let's take a look at another one. And I won't talk too much. You can see here the glaze kind of started forming some interesting textures. And then where it got hotter and melted more, it got very glossy. And then we come back to more matted and kind of globular texture, which I really love this variation again, that very natural kind of feeling. And there's the inside with the chamari and the chazenzuni, chadumari, chazenzuni. And then I guess have I shown you the foot? Here's the foot of the first piece. And here's the foot of the second piece. Now the second piece is glazed all the way around. I think both of these are glazed all the way over the foot. And then they're fired on a little stilt. That's one option. I'll show you some other options as well. So we'll look at a couple more Raku black, because that's what my students are focusing on right now, is this Raku black tea bowl. And here is a piece that's entirely glossy with just a little bit of an alteration there, a little bit of change in texture and color there. And then as you get down to the bottom, you can see that it gets a little bit more matte in certain places. And then there's the inside. Inside is often a little bit lower temperature, so maybe should have dusted first, but anyway, there's the inside of the bowl. So, and here's one last Raku. You can see these all have the same, don't want to do that. They all have the same Raku glaze on them. It's a glaze I've developed called very, very imaginatively Raku black. And it's a formulation of several different glazes all combined. And that's, so you can see here some areas where there's less glaze where my fingers were placed during the glazing there. And that's a nice mark. So when I take it off, you can see that there's a mark there where I purposely did not allow so much glaze. And again, this has a wonderful textured quality that goes from glossy to matte as well. These are really fine examples. You can also see another quality of a tea bowl, which is that sort of landscape quality at the lip. You can see as you look across the lip, it looks like rolling hills. That would be the metaphor. The lip is rolling hills, a landscape as you gaze out. Sierra foothills, perhaps, since this is a California bowl. So those are some. Now we're going to go to a style that is very similar to Black Raku, but it's called Hikidashi. It's fired at about cone 8 in a wood kiln and removed during the firing, and it can be dunked in water or just left to cool in the air. But it comes out of about a 2300 degree kiln, bright, bright, bright red, white almost, and then cools down. And most of them, well, half of them survive. And so here's an example. Again, you can see the texture changing all the way around that really desirable range of texture. And there's the inside. And there's the foot. Get a little closer on that. And the foot is really one of the great finishing moments of making a tea bowl. This is another Hikidashi piece, and you can see it varies in color from a kind of maroon to a soft kind of black. And you can also see that kind of full form down here, compressing in a little bit, coming out, compressing in again, as I talked about. As we can go around and see. What was I going to talk about? Here's an example of a foot that is, this is again Hikidashi. So it was taken out of the kiln and there wasn't glaze on the very bottom. So you can actually get a better look at the foot. And what I was going to tell you about is that the foot is quite a challenge to the potter, especially if you've been trained as a Western potter. There's so much to unlearn. Let's take a look at another bowl here. Now we're going to move on from the Black Raku to looking at a whole variety of wood-fired bowls. Here is a good one to start with because it's very subtle. It's a little bit of clay on there, but that adds atmosphere. Very subtle. This kind of bowl has I love this sort of bowl because it's mostly the vapor is carried in the flame responding to the clay. So there's not a really heavy ash buildup. There's the foot you can see. It's not a really heavy ash buildup. And this is a great example of just what you get when you have a bowl in a fairly quiet place in the kiln where the ash can't reach it entirely. I mean, there is some ash up right here. You can see a little bit of ash getting to the clay and melting. But here, what you have is the gases. Some of the same things that are in the ash that melt into glaze will affect the clay. But when it's gaseous, it's just a fraction of the amount that's in the ash. And so what you get is these gases of calcium, potassium, and sodium that are fluxing and changing color in the clay. And there's the inside, the Udamari. And we've seen the bottom of this piece. So that's a kind of a category. I think I might have one more of those more subtle. Yes, this is a lovely one. It's a great example of that. Very subtle. You can see the bare clay color here, where very little ash got to it. And with a lot of these pieces, you can kind of track the fire across the form. I'll talk more about cutting the feet in a minute here. But what you see here is the part that's facing forward to the fire. And you can see that because you can see the ash buildup right here. And you can also see the ash buildup right here on the lip where the flame and the ash are hitting here mostly. It's fairly far back in the kiln because you know that because it's not heavy ash. I'll show you some heavy ash examples as well, but you can see, and also it just catches there. Not a lot of ash falling on the inside. Some, you can see that black area is heavier ash and the white area is lighter ash. You get a nice kind of yin-yang color there. So these are really, it took me some years to appreciate how beautiful these are. For a while I was going, oh, I want heavy ash, and I didn't get it. But then I realized these are such elegant compositions of the path of the flame. The flame is doing such a good job of marking these. And there's the foot on that one again. So those are some what we would call hiro. Hiro is the mostly colored by the vapors coming from the wood rather than the ash itself. We can move into some ash, all ash pieces, and then we can go from there into some glaze pieces. And I'll talk a little bit about carving the foot. All of this took me some time to learn how to do. When I first started making tea bowls, I was doing it by looking at books on Japanese pottery, and I wasn't really taking the time to check the measurements. So my scale was off, my size was off. And then I would respond too exaggerated to some of the qualities. And so I'd fill them with stones and things, and it'd be too much and such. And I didn't quite realize the problem I was having. That's got a nice little lip there. You can see a change in the lip. It's quite lovely. So I like this dramatic method of cutting a foot. There are many different ways to do it, but this one this really takes a lot of kind of courage to you're cutting right, just chunks of clay off of it. And 1 out of 3, you cut right through it probably. So here, you can see there's quite an active surface here. There's the foot. Here's the inside. So, and the other thing you're seeing here is that mixed into this clay body is a little bit of silica stone and a little bit of granite. And that's giving you this, the hanten, the spots that you see are the granite. Granite is actually a flux, a glaze at these temperatures. This is fired to above 2,300 degrees. And so the granite melts to these white spots and creates a hanten effect. And this is all natural ash glaze. There's no actual glaze in this piece at all. So, and there again is the foot. So it takes a while to learn how to make these. The first batch, the early tea bowls that I made, I was firing. I fired a bunch of them, and then my brother, who lives in Japan, was coming to a reunion. We do a reunion every summer with my family, and we were meeting at a house in Lake Tahoe, California, and we were before my brother was bringing his in-laws, his father and mother-in-law, and do you want to say something and be part of this video?
What video?
I'm making a video about tea bowls. But there's nobody on the other side. I'm just talking.
Nice.
You want to?
It's gonna be a cousin.
Okay. So, I was telling you this story. I like that because this is a very natural environment where we're in our COVID confines, and there's a life going on around us. So here, I want to talk about. I made all these early tea bowls. There you go. Very nice. I made all these tea bowls, put them up on the mantle of the house in Tahoe because I knew my brother's in-laws were coming, and they're Japanese. My brother's wife is Japanese. And both my brother's wife and his parents were tea aficionados and had studied tea. And so I didn't say anything because I knew if I would get if I wanted a critique, this is back 30 years ago, probably. Yeah. So if I wanted an honest critique, I couldn't ask them what they thought. I knew that that would just get very nice, very nice. So I put them up on the mantle, and then when they came in from the airport and they arrived, we were all talking, and all of a sudden their eyes fell on these tea bowls sitting up on the mantle, and they just rushed over and started picking them up, and the 3 of them were talking about them and moving them around and talking about them. And I walked over to my brother and I said, just don't censor, just tell me exactly what they're saying. Just translate for me. And he was saying, oh, too bumpy, too small, too rough. Oh, good effort, but not, wrong shape. And so I was getting a fabulous critique, and they were all just a mess. None of them were really working. And all of a sudden you saw this look in their eyes, and they kind of looked at each other, and they looked over at Barry, and they said something, and Barry pointed to me. And they had asked him, who made these? And he said, Mark made them. And they looked at me and they said, oh, very nice. So that's what that's a lovely quality about the Japanese culture. This is a really unique bowl. And sometimes, there's lots of reasons that the Japanese love tea bowls. And there's so much about them. There's a spiritual component, there's an aesthetic component, there's a historical component, there's a political component. Tea is so complex and involved and so woven into the growth of Japanese culture. And this lovely piece is unique because I made it while leading a workshop with my dear friend Marcus Bohm from a very northeastern corner of Germany. Marcus has a fabulous studio there, and he and I did a workshop together, which he titled Double Fantasy, because there were two Marks, Marcus Bohm and Mark Lansing. And we did this wonderful workshop, and this piece was right up in front of on a front shelf during the firing that we did. And at the very end, I grabbed it with a hook and pulled it into the fire. And so I have an artifact, which is a piece of another pot that got stuck on there, and I have a piece of a pot inside. And it was just buried in the last several hours of ashes. So, and wood was falling on top of it. And it's a beautiful piece, and it's a remarkable piece. And this kind of accident, this kind of mark of the fire and kind of evidence of the trauma that the piece went through is highly valued. So that's a very special piece because it has memories. I'm such a professional here. You can see I'm knocking things around. So let's look at a few other kinds of bowls. Everything is kind of different. We could look at glazes. This is kind of a special technique here. And in this case, what you can see, it's kind of a very active surface. It's really wonderful to hold. Very active surface. It has, I think there might be a little Shino glaze on it. Yeah, Oni Shino perhaps. And then it's very active glaze, but what's going on as well is that, I don't think this has any glaze on it actually, it's just the slip. So I threw the piece and compressed the cylinder, and then took lots of slip and just wiped it very kind of vigorously over the surface, and then reached in and spread it out into the final form. So the slip stretched, and that gave me this effect. I want to do more of this. I haven't done nearly enough. And you can see the ash started to fill in the chadumari, and the term for that kind of effect, that pool of ash, is called a yudamari, which is ash pool rather than tea pool. So I've got that going on. There's a lot of beautiful things going on with this piece. And there's the foot. So as I was going to say, carving feet is quite difficult. Let's look at some different shapes here. This is a lovely shape. This is the funnel shape. And I will get to talking about the feet. I'm sure I will. The funnel shape originally, I think, was mostly inspired by rice bowls coming out of Korea for a nickel. They're very, mass-produced rice bowls. And in the early 1500s, the tea monk Senyo Rikyu grabbed or found some rice bowls that he really liked, and he began serving tea with them. And that was quite controversial because I think he started selling them for the equivalent of, thousands of dollars. And they were a nickel originally, but they came out of Korea. Korea was so admired for their ceramics because of Rikyu's appreciation of the honesty of their pottery. It's a rather complex subject. But Hideyoshi, who was the shogun at the time, the head of all Japan, had gotten it into his head that he wanted to invade Korea and I guess own it. So he led an invasion into Korea, and he was not successful. And so he was in retreat. But because he was studying tea and he knew about Korean ceramics, he kidnapped an entire potter's village. He took an entire pottery village out of Korea and brought them back with him in retreat to Japan. And they ended up settling. He settled them in Kyushu, in the Kyushu island, the island below the main island in Japan. And this is a shape that you associate with Kyushu. You find the funnel-shaped tea bowls coming out of Hagi and Kyushu area, and that's their origin. There's a tremendous amount of Korean pottery in some of the Japanese forms, and certainly in these. So this is, again, a wood-fired bowl with a shino on it. You can see it, here's the foot area, and you can see the clay is rather dark and the shino is rather light, so it makes a really nice contrast. There's a trimmed foot, and then that's a seashell, and you'll see a few of these seashell effects. But these seashells are used, you see them quite often in wood firing, and there's a real good scientific reason for that. Excuse me, it has to do with the chemistry of the process. So seashells, let's look at another one of these seashell examples. Seashells, you can see here's another bowl, and this is when you're really good, when you're a great master, you can make the glaze drip upward, defy gravity, go straight up. See that lovely drip? No, that's actually, clearly I fired it upside down. That's all there was to that. And you can look in there, and there's fired on 3 small seashells. So the thing about seashells, and you can see that lovely effect, that's from the salt, the sodium in the shell. And the shell is almost entirely calcium with a little bit of sodium. And so that's the effect you can get with that. And this was fired in a very special way under the firebox of a Bori box kiln. And this effect is quite unique, but the way the shells work is I put the shells inside with a little bit of wadding to hold them to a brick, and they sit there. And what happens as they heat up, the calcium acts as a flux, turning silica to glass. Clay is almost entirely silica. So the calcium from the shell that's in contact with the silica will turn it to glass. But the unique thing about calcium as a flux is the whole thing doesn't melt. If it were granite, if it were a granite rock, the whole rock would turn to liquid glaze. It would be a big mess. But with calcium, only the film that is in touch with silica will turn to glass. The rest will go to powder, and then it acts as an ideal separator. So that's what you have here, is you have the surface of the shell turning to glass and really making a lovely impression and staying there. You can see the ridges of the scallop shell. So that's how that works. And then it just separates. So it's a beautiful technique. And this is a lovely bowl. There's the bottom. And the reason that this is so beautifully rough here is because it was fired under the firebox in this position. So I can talk tea bowls, as you're beginning to suspect. I can talk forever, hours and hours. I'm hopefully to keep this to some degree limited, but I want you to get a sense of all the thousands and thousands and thousands of ways that you can make a beautiful bowl. And you can see all those drips are dripping upward because of the being fired upside down again. And what's the glaze on this? I don't know if there, no, there is no, I don't think there is a glaze on this at all. This is just the ash coming into play here. And again, those seashells doing their thing. And it doesn't happen in every place at the kiln. It happens at certain temperatures where you get a really clear mark. And here is the foot of this piece. See a lovely kind of asymmetry of that foot there. So trimming feet, as I say, is very, very difficult. It took me years to figure out how to do it. About 8 years before I was willing to show any feet that I was really proud of. This is a unique bowl. Very dark result on the outside. And then a beautiful light color result on the inside where less ash and atmosphere got. And so really lovely transition there. And this is a Shino slip glaze that's quite thick and crawly. And so this is the result that we got. It's very dramatic. Sometimes it gets to be too much, but in this case, it seems just ideal. It really works. Here's something we can talk about, and maybe I'll get to finish this idea about the feet. This is just a radically shaped bowl. And probably these kinds of bowls became more probable, more acceptable after the work of Senyo Rikyu. Senyo Rikyu was the tea monk. He was an apprentice to, I'm sorry, not Senyo Rikyu, Senyo Oribe. Senyo Oribe was Rikyu's apprentice. And he had this incredible ability to innovate within tradition. So he was having made for him. He wasn't a potter himself. He would order these things, but he would design teaware and food serving trays for kaiseki, the food for tea. But his forms were radical departures from the calm, staid, kind of the Raku cylinder tea bowls. He was much more radical in his form. He would do this because his idea was, look, if I understand the spirit of wabi and sabi and tea, if I follow those ideas, but I get there a different way. That was his brilliance, is that he was able to challenge the methodology and some of the sort of habits or kind of, not quite cliche, but there were the traditions of tea, and he was able to break new ground. While never, he wasn't leaving the tradition, he was very much immersed in the tradition. And there's the foot there. So what I want to tell you about carving feet is that it's a composition. It's like a really great sumie painting. It's about gesture, spontaneity, honesty, clarity, confidence. The Japanese say that you can tell the character of a potter by the foot they trim. You can tell if they were nervous, and that usually is indicated by a really heavy, thick bottom where they didn't want to cut through it, so they shied off. Or you can tell if they were unsteady, or all kinds of qualities, or if they had great courage and insight. And so here is a foot for this bowl. You can see, and this is really a dramatic bowl, all wood fired with no glaze on it. So let's look at another Oribe piece. Senyo Oribe was quite a free thinker. So this is a low, wider bowl, and Oribe is typified either by black or green glaze, dark green or black glaze, with white zones in between. So typically two zones of green and white in between. And the green kind of acts like a frame. And then in the space that is the white area, there's usually an iron, kind of an iron painting composition. And sometimes it's quite literal, like Mount Fuji, or it's a bridge, or plum blossoms, or all kinds of identifiable imagery. And sometimes it's patterning. It's very complex patterning, or kind of rhythmic patterning, and sometimes it's more abstract. I'm fond of saying that, 450 years ago, Oribe was way ahead of Paul Klee or Kandinsky. You can see some real abstraction, and that's the idea that I began to get interested in, is making, really seeing this, setting up the bowl, putting in the dark glazes, and then just diving into the white zones and making abstract brush marks. And so I'm thinking of Oribe when I'm shaping the bowl. I'm thinking of Oribe when I'm glazing the bowl. And then I'm thinking about Oribe is getting drunk with Kandinsky or Franz Klein, or maybe Philip Guston, or some abstract expressionist kind of experience in there. So I really enjoy these. That's the Oribe. I could really go on forever, but just a few more that we can look at. Let me talk about the glaze. There's a glaze that you may know called Temoku. Temoku is a black-brown glaze coming out of China originally, and the Temoku tea bowls were very elegant. They were very symmetrical. Typically, here's a Temoku tea bowl, but this is again Oni Temoku. It's Demon Temoku. There's a fairly typical Temoku surface there, and so what happens is, what's so interesting is what happens to Temoku when it's exposed to ash in the wood fire. So that's where I'm exposing it to ash. Again, in China and Japan, for making a Temoku tea bowl, they would, if they were doing it in the wood fire, it would be completely protected from the ash. And this is why they want a uniform black bowl that looks like that. And I want this. And what you have here, where it's very, very heavy, you get this blue and this kind of blue-green veined kind of surface. And then there's this in-between phase where you get this golden streaking, which is so beautiful. And I love that. And then, but it's hard to find a spot in the kiln. It can't be too close up to the front. It has to be quite a bit in the back. And then there's the, so you can see that the heat and the flame and the ash came this way and hit the edge of the bowl there. And then the backside, you can actually see where the flame wrapped around the piece and then moved on to the next piece and left the temoku pretty unaffected down here. And same on the inside. This section here was facing, so the flame goes over and can't get down in. It kind of jumps over that first section, and you get this really beautiful changing color here. So Temoku is a remarkable glaze, one that I avoided for years because there's too much iron in Temoku, it won't make a good glaze. Turns out it's stunning. Here's a remarkable piece as well. So I'm going to just show you this one here. Now this piece was entirely glazed with Temoku. So if I put this in a gas kiln, the whole piece would have looked like that, outside and inside. That's the Temoku on the inside. And where the ash can get to it is where you get this blue color. And what's so interesting is that you can really tell, like for instance, when you look at this, so this is the backside facing away from the flame right here. And so the flame is wrapping around the piece. And this is so close to the front that you're almost getting no Temoku. And then right at this point here, the flame has to move on, so it doesn't deposit much ash. You can see a little bit of change in the ash here to get this yellow streaking, a little bit of that. And then on the inside, it's just in the lip that is into the flame and a little bit there, but it's just really in a big ash area. And there's the foot. See that drip of Temoku coming down to the foot. So it's a lovely, lovely piece. I really find this piece just pure poetry, if I do say so myself, and I believe I do. A couple more, and then I'm going to let you contemplate these beauties here. And that really is the role of a tea bowl, is that in the tea ceremony, which is this delightful invitation to meet with good people in good spirit and be present in their company and just enjoy the moment and experience beauty and experience fellowship and experience just kind of golden glowing ideas, just wonderful ideas. That's what tea ceremony is all about. And so what you're doing is you're meeting, you're sharing tea, and the whole idea is this concept of just becoming calmly present in the moment and experiencing beauty and fellowship. That's really where the tea is. And it becomes a way of life, a call to become more and more aware in the moment of the beauty of life and the beauty of things around you and the people around you. It's a really very restorative and moving experience. This is a tea bowl glazed with a glaze I call Patrick's Yellow. And it's a devilish glaze in that it runs like crazy. So that's what's going on here. But it gives you some really intriguing kind of blushing orange and yellow colors, and then heavy ash here. So you can see quite a range of effects here. You can see the inside. So, and we'll look at one more bowl and then we'll call it a great experience. And so here's another fine shape. There's a form. So this is that cylinder form that we started with. This is what my students are working towards with their Raku tea bowls. This is a Shino glaze on a, it looks like it might have a little bit of Temoku in it as well. It might be an orange Shino, but it does look like there might be some Temoku in there. So you can see the form. Again, you can see that in composition, sometimes this section I let go really quite high, and sometimes in this case, it's just above the middle there for that ridge, and the undulating lip for that kind of landscape effect, and just a feeling of, I just love the asymmetrical experience of what the fire does to the pieces, because it's a very natural, you're making a lot of the decisions, the where you place it, what you glaze it with, the clay that you use, all of these things, how you fire, what atmospheres you fire in, what temperatures you achieve, how often you get to those temperatures, drop it down and get it. You're making thousands of decisions. So you're really collaborating with all the forces of nature. And then what happens is the fire kind of becomes your paintbrush and the ash becomes your paint along with the glaze that you use. And like you've seen here, about more than half of my pieces never get any glaze on them because I want to see what the ash will do with them. So there you can see again that kind of vigorous composition of the foot that is, it's very functional. It sits beautifully and it lifts the tea bowl up just enough because during the tea ceremony, the tea host will have to pick up the bowl and move it around, and they need to be able to grip the bowl easily. So you want a little bit of a lift there. Tea practitioners that I've worked with and met, many of them had expressed an appreciation and an interest mostly with these bowls because these are really easy. These kind of, it's not that they're looking for ease, they're looking for grace in presentation. And so there's never really any likelihood of slippage with this. You're going to reach the bowl and you're going to be able to hold it and move it around easily. Whereas with some of these, when they have a very low foot, this is, which I love the visual of, I love the way that looks, you have that very low foot, then you've got to be a little bit more attentive in holding on to the bowl. So that is a little bit of a discussion about tea bowls and what they offer us and what we can do with them and think of how we can think about them and experience them. We've seen black Raku tea bowls. We've seen a variation of Hikidashi tea bowls, which is a high temperature version of that. We've explored Oribe a little bit, some unique types of firing with different glazes and slips. But primarily, it was just to sit with you and enjoy the beauty of these bowls. I have found them to be a great source of comfort. Really, when I pick up a bowl and I just get lost in looking at what the fire and I have done together. And I start looking at these pieces and appreciating their color, their texture, their form. And it goes to that place, like looking at a great painting can often, when you're looking at a painting, you often get that feeling of being tranquil and calm and present in the moment. And these bowls can do that. I remember there was a time in my life when work was a little tough, and I had a big meeting, just a casual dinner actually with a number of my dear colleagues, people I really enjoyed working with, and we all came over to my house and we're having dinner. And before they got there, I talked to them and said, "We're not going to talk shop." And we were having such a troubled time that everybody kept talking shop. And so at one point, I just walked over to my shelf here and I picked up a tea bowl and I just passed it around the table, just handed it out and one person after another. And as it went around, I talked a little bit about tea bowls and we stopped talking about shop and the conversation shifted to philosophy, to what matters, to beauty, to fellowship. It was really a great moment. We didn't have any tea, we just had tea bowls, but that's what they do for me. And I'm really happy to have been able to spend this time sharing those with you. I look forward to your comments.